Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the AACC policy update, the latest developments in workforce Pell webinar. Despite what you see on the screen here, it is in fact July 29th, and we're glad you're with us. My name is Jim Hermes. I'm the Associate Vice President of Government Relations here at AACC. And this is the latest of several webinars we've done on the topic of workforce Pell. And each time we try to give you a little bit of a snapshot of exactly what is going on. And today we'll be doing that from a national, state, and institutional perspective. And what we hope you'll get out of this today is to hear about what's going on in several different places, and perhaps that will spark some ideas for things that you might do differently or new things that you might do in your state. And of course, we'll be aiming to leave plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the presentations. So if any of those, when those questions occur to you, please type those into the Q&A box in the Zoom controls on your screen. But first, we're going to get into a little bit of a status update before getting to our presenters. First of all, we're not going to get real deep, and we're going to assume that at this point in time, everyone here is pretty much familiar with the basic contours of the Workforce Pell program. In terms of the basic requirements, of course, our presenters will certainly touch on a lot of those requirements in terms of how things are playing out so far in their states or institutions. But we won't be doing a kind of an overview of those right now. But I think, as everyone knows, the program, quote unquote, went live on July 1st, and the rest of the information on this screen is basically, some of the stuff that we know in terms of what's happening right now, and our presenters will, of course, get further into that. We know, for instance, in the conversations we've had at AACC, that several programs, no exact count at this point, but there are many programs that have received state approval or are well on their way to getting state approval. Of course, there's variation among the states, regarding exactly what those approval processes are, as you all know. Some programs at this point have been completely submitted to the Department of Education. Again, not an exact count, but it's a fairly small number at this point. Some are in progress in terms of being submitted to ED. So they have been approved. In other words, they've been approved by their state, they've been certified by their state, and those applications are entering into the final stage of the approval process. No programs have yet been approved by the Department of Education, however. We are led to believe that initial applications during this first few months of the program, at least, will likely take a couple of months to be approved. And I think, like everyone else, the Department of Education is both a big supporter of this program, as they've shown, and the Trump administration in general is a big supporter of this program. But of course, everyone also wants to get it right. So I think, as we're all feeling through this, and getting things together, everyone wants to make sure that we're getting off on the right foot for what we hope to be a very successful program in the long term. And further guidance from the Department of Education will be hopefully forthcoming to address some of the questions that we know that you all have. And we'll try our best to answer some of those today, but we know that there are other questions that we do need the department to weigh in on as we move forward. Just here are some of the things that I think most of you are probably well aware of in terms of some of the challenges that you all are facing in getting your programs approved and getting your state processes for approval in place. Access to the right data, the 12-month rule, and how that's playing out in terms of getting new programs approved, the program length requirements, and as you look at what programs are potentially going to be eligible. Just where your state is and where states are, and just in their basic engagement with the process and in getting the processes set up. And we've also heard that some states are also adding their own additional requirements into the mix as well. our presenters are going to be getting into a lot of these issues in much more depth as we go along. But just want to mention some of those at the outset in terms of what we're hearing from you all. But most importantly, I think, in addition to, addressing the challenges that we're facing in this point in time, is very important to keep in mind that we are in early days. It is July 29th, so we've been, we're just less than a month of this program being live. It is complex, as we all know, and and as anything big and new and complex comes online, there are always issues that people face, and then generally things get easier and smoother as we go along in terms of getting programs approved for Workforce Pell. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, everyone is trying to get this right. So this is a robust and healthy program in the medium and long term. With that, let me just quickly introduce our four presenters. We'll start first with two folks that are going to be talking about these issues from the national perspective, and then move on to a state level leader and then an institutional leader. First then is going to be Iris Palmer. Iris is director of community college at New America. And New America is an organization that AACC works with in many different areas, and they've had a long and exemplary history of focus on community colleges in America. Kate Kinder is the executive director of the National Council for Workforce Education. NCWE is one of AACC's affiliated councils, again, someone that we work very closely with in addressing not only workforce Pell issues, but workforce issues generally. And Kate is a very recent member of the AACC Board of Directors. Chandler LaBeouf is the Executive Vice President in the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. And again, here we work very closely with what we call our state directors here at AACC. Again, that is another affiliated council, and Chandler is a very active member of that group and a prized colleague. And then last but not least is Steve Partridge. Steve is the Vice President of Strategy, Research, and Workforce Innovation at Northern Virginia Community College, right across the river from here. And Steve, again, is someone that we've turned to many times over the years for insight into workforce issues generally, and of course now in Workforce Pell. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Iris.
Thank you so much, Jim. And you can go ahead and go to the first slide because you said we wouldn't go over the requirements of Workforce Pell, but my first slide actually does lay them out again. So this slide actually captures the pieces that the states need to validate, which is that first line, if you want to go to the next slide, Jim. This group, and this is actually what I'm going to be focusing on in my presentation today, is how states are setting up their processes to validate that Workforce Pell eligible programs meet these criteria as the states define them. I did also, if you want to go to the next slide, want to highlight the accountability measures that are here and required by the Department of Education that the programs have to meet as well. And states are responsible for validating that the program has met these requirements for at least a year, but I'm not really going to be talking about that process today. I'm going to be focusing on that first row around the alignment, meeting the hiring requirements, portability, and the academic credit pieces. Thank you. So the analysis I did actually covers 14 states at this point. It could cover many more, but I can't keep updating it as fast as people are putting out new policies. But it actually looks at the final policies in 11 states, and it looked at draft policies in 3 states. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's these 4 requirements that the states define and validate for unlocking the program approval for Workforce Pell. It has to lead to one of the occupations that the states have designated as high need, high demand. It has to meet employer demand. It has to demonstrate that it's portable and stackable, and it has to prove that it articulates to a program for credit. Next slide. So the 1 occupation, 3 tests. So states are really creating incredibly different lists of occupations that Workforce Pell programs are allowed to lead into. Most states are requiring just 1 like either high skill, high wage, or in demand. But some states are requiring either two of three or all three. So Colorado, Texas, and Minnesota require, well, Texas, Illinois, Minnesota require all three, and Colorado requires two of the three. Go ahead and go to the next one. So how strict is in demand looking in some of these places? And there's just a huge variation, and this slide really lays it out. So Michigan, any occupation that has more than a median level of growth is considered in demand. And then this goes all the way to Tennessee, where it has a wage floor in their in demand definition, a size floor for the occupation itself, plus two or three different hiring activity indicators that you have to meet. And so they have obviously a much more targeted occupation list. And these are sort of the way that it gets from the most permissive to the most selective. Go ahead, Jim. So the wage and skill bars just vary just as much, I would say. So we go all the way from Pennsylvania, which sets a floor of 150% of the poverty level for being considered high wage. So they have many more occupations, all the way to Tennessee, where they require 20% premium over the regional medium wage, which is like it's a pretty high wage bar. The high skills requirements this is a little more fungible in most places. So Tennessee, Pennsylvania, they're like anything that requires more than a high school diploma is considered high skill. But Maryland and Colorado actually map to ONET. So we'll go ahead and go to the next one. So you have a workforce Pell program that maps to one of these occupations that's on your state's list. The state has to tell you how they reached that occupation list, which is what we just talked about. But then your program also has to demonstrate that it meets employer demand. And states are doing that in different ways. Most of them are requiring two or three letters from different employers that validate that they would be hiring from a program like this, right? Colorado also accepts like being on their statewide credential registry. That also counts for them. And then states like Arizona, Ohio, and Iowa accept job postings as proof, or workforce board minutes, or being on your advisory committee minutes. Those also count as proof of employer demand for your program. Next slide. So this is where it gets complicated. So we also talked about how it has to be portable and stackable. So the way that this is being interpreted is that portable means it has to be able to go across multiple employers. So it's not customized training. More than one employer will hire from it. Well, you might have noticed in the employer demand section that that's exactly what they were asking. And so most states have decided that if it meets the employer hiring requirements, then it also meets the portable requirement. And for stackable, if it meets the articulation into credit requirement, it's stackable. So most states are just sort of saying, if you meet our articulation requirement, we consider it a stackable program. Go ahead and go to the next one. So how are states having these programs document their articulation? So most are actually asking for written articulation agreements or credit for prior learning crosswalks. Colorado and Louisiana actually want to know exactly, and I'm sure Chandler might talk more about this, but they actually want to know how the program will articulate, like what kinds of credits will you be getting from the program when it articulates into your program. And Iowa and Illinois say if your program is included on their statewide articulation transfer pathways, then it automatically meets this requirement. So the ETPL, this is interesting. So many states are requiring you to either be on the ETPL already or to co-register with the ETPL to be eligible for Workforce Pell. Arizona and Illinois are saying if you want to opt into the ETPL, you can. Now, the wrinkle here is that currently the Department of Labor is saying if you want to use the interstate data exchange for wage records, you have to be on the ETPL. So that might cause more states to want to be on the ETPL. And can I just, I'm sure this audience knows all about it, but a lot of community colleges don't really want to have to mess with the ETPL because it's a lot of bureaucracy. And so this could add another layer of bureaucracy, but hopefully it actually leads to better alignment is sort of where I'm at with this. Next slide. So what are we saying here? There's a lot of common ground in the way states are deciding to define the their criteria. There are huge differences though in the standards that they're really implementing around this. And I would say we're in very early days, as Jim said, and we're going to be expecting a lot of refinement around this. And so, yeah, like stay tuned. I think it's going to continue to be interesting, and we're going to continue to be doing analysis on it. So thank you, Jim.
Thanks so much, Iris. Really interesting stuff. I was particularly interested to hear that states are essentially equating the articulation for credit and the stackable requirement, which we in our comments to the Department of Education urged them to do at the regulatory level, and they chose not to do that. But so interesting to hear that states are taking that steps
Well, if
themselves.
you're asking them to demonstrate that it stacks,
Right.
articulation is a higher bar, so it
It's,
doesn't make
it's
sense to make them
essentially.
people.
Thanks very much. Kate, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you to you and your AACC colleagues for this opportunity. And Iris did an amazing job laying the groundwork for kind of what's happening at states, and I'm going to dig into a little bit more about what that looks like at colleges. For those of you not familiar with NCWE, as Jim said, we are really focused on advancing workforce education, and so we are focused on lifting up practitioner voice, and we have a working board that's been really informing our strategy on this. So hopefully this connects to very much the realities that you're seeing on the ground at your colleges and that your learners face. So in terms of looking at where colleges are at, as Iris laid out, there are 50 plus different processes, interpretations at the state level, and then even at the college level or regional level, how that's playing out is different. But I am hearing consistent threads among all the colleges that the slow start is strategic and intentional, and we need to be clear about why. And then it's critical that we really amplify what is possible and what is not within the current workforce Pell rules. So I think one of the things that we need to really message as a sector, and as much as you can with your state policymakers, local policymakers, federal, is that the slow start is not because colleges aren't excited about the potential. And it's not because they aren't nimble and responsive to the needs of their learners and the economy and this opportunity. And it's not because they're bad actors or don't have high quality programs. The reasons they are starting slow is because there's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to happen. And that's everything from updating financial aid systems so that you can process financial aid for non-credit, so you have a year-long term, so you are able to convert clock hour, to really looking at your advising processes, and then how are you going to get the data, how are you going to report the outcomes, and also just kind of thinking about how do you make sure you start this well and so it's positioned for growth. So I think that's a big piece, is that I think there is some notion with some state policymakers, especially, that this is a panacea to meeting their local labor market needs. And colleges are being really clear. This is a tool and a lever we're excited about, but there's some parameters and limitations that are challenging, as Jim touched on. Next slide. I think in terms of looking at the process and programs that are in the pipeline, I think colleges have been doing the work even while the states are refining their processes and getting approval for those to assess what programs are possible. And so I think you look at in Mott Community College in Michigan, which is a really standout workforce college and has done the clock hour pilot. They have 7 programs that are approved. They believe are approved. They're kind of waiting for all the final notice at the state level, and now they need to go through the work to get them approved at the federal level. There's in Arkansas, they have a really great process that the Department of Education designed in collaboration with labor, but really early on, their labor commissioner kind of handed it over to higher ed, recognizing financial aid is in the purview of higher ed. So they have a really clear process that kind of builds on the other structures that they have. Last count I heard, they have about 12 submissions. I think 8 of those will fit. And then there's other states that are just kind of waiting and seeing. There's nothing yet. Ohio came out in the spring with a list of 62 programs that they thought would be eligible. So I think it varies. What I'm seeing from a lot of colleges that have really robust workforce programs as they're starting with anywhere from 1 to 6 in the queue. And those are generally in areas like manufacturing, healthcare, IT, some construction, some education, but really programs that they've been running for a long time that they know meet the local labor market demand. They have tight employer partnerships that really lead to those outcomes and that are stackable. There's also, Virginia is, and I know Steve will speak about this later, but is a standout state with their Fast Forward and G3 program and just their industry sector academies and all the work they've done to meet the local labor market need. I think that's an example of the challenges with the parameters in this policy, both the 150 hours in 8 weeks, in that, a number of their programs that are really effective, that increase wages, that meet local labor market demands are likely not going to be eligible. And so I think, there have been estimates that 6 of their 600 will fit. And so I think that's kind of the piece, is that there's a need for this. Colleges are excited. And the parameters, both with the time, with the outcomes, and the length clock hours are posing some challenges along with the 12-month. Very few colleges I've heard are really trying to tweak programs yet, because they just want to see how it works with the programs that they do have and know will meet these outcomes and that they've been offering robustly for a number of years. Next slide. I think the other piece too that really want to underscore with the implementation is that there really is an excitement around this workforce Pell being as an additional lever and resource and a way to braid resources. So that's one of the things that there was a college leader who really remarked that it is not the relief is that it means, for especially for non-credit programs or professional skills training, clock hour programs, whatever the college calls it, this relieves some of the burden to try to find all of the resources from one source. And so I think that's the piece, is if you can really think strategically and work with partners to think about how do you leverage WIOA? How do you use Title II to cover some of those remediation costs that are not eligible in Workforce Pell? How do you use SNAP ENT? And so really thinking how this can be a robust combination. Make sure your students are eligible for the emergency aid. So I think that's the piece that's really important. I think one of the things that we really need to amplify as a sector is that Workforce Pell will not cover the cost that a college incurs to run the program. So I think it's great that it provides some key student resources, but I think we need to be really clear. We need state investments. We need foundation investments. This is not replacing those. This is helping get access for more students. But we need to keep doubling down on those investments that we do have for workforce programs that lead to economic prosperity. Next slide. And then I think the other piece that I am consistently hearing that I'm really excited about is that Workforce Pell is really an opportunity to look at our systems and have conversations that we've been needing to have for a long time, have been having, but can spur us to make changes. And so what I'm seeing with campuses is even those that don't have programs approved yet are in the works of deciding how to do this, is these are kind of some of the fundamental elements that they are really focusing on that'll improve outcomes for students and student success and improve employer partnerships. So they're looking at how to eliminate those traditional academic silos that have existed for far too long between non-credit and credit. They are really relying on the expertise of their workforce staff and faculty who have deep expertise in how to braid funding together for learners, how to reach adults, how to ensure that you are getting them connected to the resources and careers that they need, really centering student experience. So doing kind of reverse design thinking and start with the student. How are they going to hear about the program? How are they going to access it? How are they going to complete the FAFSA form in a timely and easy manner? How are you going to ensure that they really want to go straight to work after that program and not persist? And if they do want to persist, encourage them and find the resources so they do not have to access Workforce Pell. There's lots of work adapting the infrastructure. I think this is one of the biggest challenges. There's a college I talked to one of the leaders, And they have 6 programs identified, great programs, good outcomes, but it's going to cost them $100,000 to update their financial aid system to be able to process non-credit financial aid. And those are the conversations that aren't happening enough. They're not resistant, they want to do it, but that is a huge cost for a college to incur to be able to operationalize this. And then I think, again, this is going back to being really clear about the challenges and the opportunities. So there's challenges and opportunities that we've been really clear about. I think let's work to change the challenges and then really leverage the opportunity. But the overall purpose of Workforce Pell, every college leader I've talked to is really behind. Next slide. And then this is just kind of the piece that is exciting is this really is a catalyst to transform higher ed and workforce students or workforce ecosystems. So I think it's a chance that we can align resources and state systems behind the scenes. I think far too often we've relied on our students to do that. So they have to go to the workforce office and the financial aid and access SNAP. This is a way we can do it behind the scenes and make it seamless. It's a way to really ensure that we have one front door approach that no matter where a learner starts at the college, whether it's an adult ed, non-credit, customized training, CTE, or academic lower division pathways, that they're all getting what they need. So that is, I think, the possibilities we're seeing.
Thanks so much, Kate. I really like that emphasis on the braiding aspect of this. I know that we've been saying, to our members when we hear things like, well, a $2,000 Pell Grant or a $1,200, whatever the amount is, that doesn't cover the cost of, program X, Y, or Z. It's like, well, yeah, but that may be true, but it gets you that much closer to doing it. And, and if you could braid in those other resources or incentivize resources that maybe didn't exist before, because now, maybe less resources are required from another place, that's what we're really hoping to see as one of the results of this program. Chandler, what's going on in Louisiana?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jim, and the team for setting up this webinar, and ultimately the panel and the members that have agreed to talk about the exciting topic, Workforce Pell, and all of the work that's been happening, and the organizations where Iris and Kate work to support states and colleges and the resources and the policy. So we appreciate the village that it's taken to get here. And I'll just share the perspective of Louisiana. We're in a very similar place as some states and ahead than others. And our goal here is really just to be a resource and a sharing knowledge to others to say, if you aren't where we are, adopt our process procedures, work with us, and we're here to help as well. For us, Louisiana has been working at Workforce Pell for the last decade. And some will say, well, we've been doing it as well. And I'd say truly, we've been trying to be built for this moment like any others, but in the way of our data, our processes, our systems, our procedures. But more importantly, a decade ago when the conversation started around Workforce Pell being entertained from a former senator from Louisiana, the Louisiana Community Technical Colleges has been advocating for this with many other advocating as well nationally, along with other organizations like Iris and Kate and RAMC, Rebuilding America's Middle Class, and AACC and others. And so we felt like from the advocacy perspective to day one launch, it's been a village of teams, both internally and externally. And so we'll kind of dive into Louisiana specifically, where we are and where our resources exist, and hope others are able to take away from that. So Jen, next slide, and we'll dive in. But for us, I'd say many states would probably share similar aspects, but why does this matter? And why is Workforce Pell important? I mean, many things that we've heard along the way that both were shared already. We've used the opportunity to leverage to remove those silos. We've also used it to build resources, and we use it to better our data processes and our systems and work collaboratively with other agencies. We do know, like many other states, we require, and most of jobs here require more than a 4-year degree. And so in order to get there, it's a lot about the funding available and the braided funding available for our students and the resources to use it. And we know large in part that our states TOPS program, which is a merit-based program, is one option, but it doesn't cover and or work the flexibility that we need for students that we serve. And even with the additional state investments that we've piloted over time, are just simply not enough to help grow the demand of the workforce needs. So Workforce Pell essentially becomes that braided funding option. However, we would all agree that there is still some challenges that we have to work through, and we're not quite there. But with any new program, there's an opportunity for all of us collectively to chip away at trying to make it work over time for our students and our families and the communities in which we serve. So next slide, Jim. Specifically, how did Louisiana do it? We did it as sort of a tri-agency launch. So when Workforce Pell passed last summer, we immediately formed a task force in our state of members of the community college system of our Department of Labor, known as LA Works, our SHIO, which is our Board of Regents higher education entity, and then any others that we thought were key to begin to identify what data do we have, which programs do we need to study and analyze, what processes do we need in place, what policies, and we try to do a lot of that work building up to the final rules that came out. So we started to just build the plane while we were flying it to determine what we think it would look like. And then ultimately, once we had additional rules, building out then what does it look like through the one door. So where are colleges in the state of Louisiana singularly going to go, to what website, what agency is going to own it. We determined that Louisiana Works Department of Labor would large in part own the process, and all the policies and procedures would live there. The application process and the alignment came amongst the agreement amongst that group. And so today, amongst our, sort of 12 colleges within LCTC, we ultimately have more than that, 14 public 2 years, and then all the proprietaries and others. And so we're just trying to be a voice to share the wealth for all, but ultimately it took a three-agency partnership to launch this with a go live in July. So Jim, next slide. What you'll see is the similar things that were focused. We're not going to necessarily go through the process, the rules, eligibility, but we identified 12 programs in the state of Louisiana. And I did link the website there, and Jim, it may allow you to click on it to give a perspective view, but it's a lot of the same skilled trades that were mentioned: construction, carpentry, etc. And then a lot of these are tied to the new economy. It was mentioned earlier about how we determined things by using Louisiana's MJ Foster Promise program and the parameter that we built over time around that to be a vehicle and a mechanism to study that and use a lot of that framework. At the same time, using our Department of Labor's 4- and 5-star job rating system to know that these are programs that are ranked in the high demand, high value sectors and which would qualify and sort of meet some of that framework. But the website, Jim, I don't know if it allows you to share it here in this framework, and we certainly can put it in the chat, but it just lays out all of the roadmap in which Louisiana built for viewers to see and understand that if you have an interest in specifically how did we do it, it lays out all the policy. So it's mentioned earlier about, the articulation policy and the program and framework in which we were putting for individuals across our state to know the application process, the deadlines, procedures, and so on and so forth. So all of that is sort of laid out on that website, can be viewed. We'll put that for viewers to review, but it gives the full roadmap, as I would call it. And we have colleges being encouraged today to apply. As mentioned, we're not approved by the US DOE like everyone else, but we are trying to approve our colleges in the state who submit their request at this point based off the 12 programs that are eligible. What are they looking to submit and say that they're going to offer, so our department can approve those? And so that is where we stand today, and we'll make sure that that's available for review. Next slide.
Yeah, sorry, Chandler. I clicked over to it, but I guess no one else was seeing what I what I was
Okay.
seeing on my
Your screen share, it
I was
got
afraid
you.
to do anything else
Here.
just in order to derail the
Okay.
entire process.
It's live and out there, and others can go
Okay.
on their own time, and we're happy to talk about it. It's taken a village to do it. By no means does one individual want to take the credit. It's taken the partners of labor and our financial aid expert on the team here, our SHIO, our data teams, to really build out the full framework. When we talked a little bit about that stacking strategy, and earlier it was talked about the braiding of resources of funding, what excites us most is that adding workforce Pell in as another option as part of stacking the strategy to help federal and state dollars stretch further to reach our students. We do know that ultimately it is only a piece of that vehicle. And we know that we're going to have to continue to advocate um, additionally for the opportunities of workforce Pell to be more flexible than what is written today and where it stands today. So we all acknowledge the barriers, but we all acknowledge that there's an exciting opportunity for it to be the right vehicle added into braided funding and states to be able to align where appropriate. It will take over time, some states to be ready to go today and some to be ready to go in the future. But we're looking forward to it being another investment in the toolkit for our students and our families to utilize. Next slide. So again, this just goes back to some of the things about the honest part, and the honest part for us about the conversation has truly been that we have 12 colleges I mentioned within our system who have said the accountability is high, the bar is high, and we're going to have to redate this data infrastructure. We're going to have to reshape some of our process and procedures. And there are the wins. I mentioned it's helped us remove silos and come together, but at the same time, it automatically has created some barriers from the onset of our institutions to say, do I even want to participate? And so we as the system have said, let us try to create that flexibility. We know that the accountability bar is high. There's a reason for it, but let us work to make it flexible so you can participate, and let us take the advocacy piece and continue to advocate with national partners and groups for continued improvement of the program. We obviously know today that fully metrics in terms of tracking, we are able to do certain work with LA Works and LED and our SHIO and regions and economic development and studying the programs and the star rating system. But we also know that those data gaps in some instances still exist, and it's helping us improve where we need to improve and focus on where we need to focus, and looking at different populations, not just the non-credit, but the adult learners that we serve through high school equivalency, through pathway stackable credentials, through the policies that we built to say, not just give an individual that aspect, but what process and procedures are going to be implemented so the outcomes that we're looking for are tied to the right results. And we can tie it back to the individual receiving the funding and actually getting the job that they were set out to do, and then ultimately the growth of the ROI and the economy that's set in place. Next slide, Jim. And so, again, I would just say here, as mentioned, the early days, long game for us. For Louisiana specifically, we were proud to be a system that went forward and advocated from the early days down to being subject matter experts as a team here to help build this. And our decade of work around the national landscape of workforce Pell. We did launch in July the website and the approval and the application and all those resources that live on that one website. We are continuing to talk about the data infrastructure and building the data that lasts. We're talking about the stacked aid. We're talking about building sort of the information where braided funding and all the funding that exists and how you can use it for our colleges so that they can be better equipped and working with students and their families, and where the federal aid is reachable. And then ultimately making sure that those programs that are approved of the 12 continue to drive the economy for Louisiana, and that the outcome and the ROI is set as the long term there. So ultimately, those are sort of the big things that we continue to focus on. We are at the phase where we are today encouraging and assisting our institutions of submitting their applications so that it can be reviewed by the committees built into LA Works, which is our Workforce Investment Council, and that what colleges are applying for, they feel strong that there is a need, a demand, and it's aligned to be able to be a part of the federal program, but also the braided funding, and that we feel comfortable and confident that what is going to be pushed out is aligned to that work. And so with that being said, that sort of wraps up the Louisiana game here for where we've been. It seems like probably a high-level overview. It's ultimately taken a lot of work, time, effort, but we feel confident and it's important to us that we spent the time to do this work. And so with that in mind, I did add to the chat that website, which you can find all the resources, and it will again break down all of the different policies, procedures, uh, framework, the map, how to launch a version of a website. So feel free to use it, adopt it, reach out to us. We're happy to talk through it. If you're not quite where we may be today, or if other states are well ahead, we will lean on them to be subject matter experts as well for us to get there. So just appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit about Louisiana.
Thanks so much, Chandler. And that reminds me that, first of all, great work that is going on in Louisiana. As always, that reminds me to remind all of you that we will be making these slides and the recording available on our website in the next day or two. And you'll get a message about the folks that are here will get a message about that. So there'll be another way that you can also check out that link that Chandler has to their website. And then finally, we're going over to Steve at Northern Virginia Community College. Of course, the largest community college in a state that I think a lot of you know is a real forerunner in this area of supporting shorter term workforce education programs. They have a number of initiatives in that area. And now Workforce Pell will join that fabric. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Yeah, and if you were paying attention to Iris's presentation, one of the slides talked about the states that are already approved or pending. You did not see Virginia in there. And that I think is intentional because as Kate mentioned, we have a program in the state called Fast Forward. It just had its 10-year anniversary of passage on July 1st. So we're excited that we've learned a lot over the last 10 years. And if you dig into Fast Forward or know about it, it very much mimics aspects of Workforce Pell. It's tied to labor demand. It requires statewide approval. Wage outcomes are measured and published. Completion rates are published. And so it has been a very nice template to sort of, over the last 10 years, play with and learn from. And I think it's really prepared the Commonwealth to be successful long-term in Workforce Pell. Our governor's office does expect to have the implementation rules in place by the end of the calendar year. And once those are in place, our system office, the VCCS, the Virginia Community College System, will start to kind of figure out how we want to roll this out across all 23 community colleges. Now, that doesn't mean NOVA hasn't been thinking a lot about what we want to offer. And as Kate mentioned too, there's some real barriers that we've identified through other processes. Financial aid for non-credit is one of them. My shop, who I run non-credit, we actually run a non-credit LPN program that's not eligible for financial aid. It qualifies, but our systems can't do it. So we have a lot of scholarship money we throw at that program to buy down the costs. But that's something over the next year we're prepared at the system level to address so that we're ready to go with Workforce Pell. We also we use LMI a lot. That's how Fast Forward sort of got started. We have to show the LMI data. We've learned a lot about how to sort of scan the system, validate the data, and work very closely with employers. We think Fast Forward will help drive Workforce Pell enrollment because we get a lot of graduates of our Fast Forward program, and they go on to other Fast Forward programs. Because the way the Fast Forward program is set up is it's tied to a credential. And many individuals coming in, one credential might not be enough to get that entry-level job. So they may come and do 2 or 3 stacks of credentials to get that first opportunity. Next slide, please. Just so you know, if you're not familiar with Fast Forward, I think we're the only college in the system right now that achieved the system goal of 95% completion for our Fast Forward programs. The next completion factor by 2030, all colleges in the Commonwealth must have a 75% credential attainment for all of our graduates. And we get it by program, but overall our Fast Forward programs get a post-training wage gain of 65%. Now, some of those entry-level jobs still don't put you at, sustainable wages in Northern Virginia, but in many parts of the Commonwealth, these are great wages for a 10-week or less program. So we've also learned as many people go to these programs, as I said, they're not ready to go to work directly with one program. We've also learned a lot of things we'd love to build into Fast Forward, some of those durable skills, maybe some work-based learning opportunities. The program is so short and the costs constrained that we can't build them into Fast Forward. So we provide some optional opportunities, but students really are saying, how can I build this into the program? And we think Workforce Pell gives us that opportunity. So we're very excited about that. Nova also traditionally has been, if you were to ask most people, what is Nova? They'd say a transfer institution. Many of our students, about 86%, come in saying their goal is to transfer to a 4-year. But over the last couple of years, we've been seeing a lot more students saying they want to go directly to the workforce. And we actually have our first skilled trades building at our Manassas campus opening in spring of 27. So all the stars are aligning with Workforce Pell, new skilled trade center, experience with Fast Forward, and hopefully they'll fix the data system so I can actually offer non-credit financial aid. And then we're going to be experimenting when the new center opens, underwriting a new 1-year program that will hopefully turn into our 2 or 3 options for our first Workforce Pell program. So we're excited about the opportunities. If you're not familiar with Fast Forward and want to learn more, we're happy to share any of the data and findings that we've had of 10 years of running a short-term program that basically mimics a Workforce Pell. But excited to take your questions. If you have anything else you need offline, I'll drop my email in the chat.
Thanks so much, Steve. We do have some questions lined up, but if you haven't yet entered your question in the Q&A box, go ahead and do that now, and we'll I think we have some in the chat as well. We'll go there. And I thought, so this is an interesting one that came in a little bit earlier, and I appreciate anyone who has thoughts on this. So the question is basically, can we discuss the interpretation of sole credential, meaning it prepares students for employment in an occupation for which there is just that one credential, and taking commercial driver's license, for example. The college may teach the curriculum and provide a certificate of completion, but the college does not issue the license. So this in this area is a little bit different of a question that we usually get about this particular requirement. So as I understand is like, is there an issue here with the fact that the college doesn't issue the ultimate CDL? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. Yeah, Iris.
So we've actually had this conversation with quite a few states, and pretty much everyone wants to include licensed occupations in their Workforce Pell list, and so they're just like, yeah, that count, the certificate counts, the license counts, and they're being pretty flexible, is what I would say, around this definition, because the first time I heard this question from an institution, I was a little flummoxed by it, but it seems that as I've been helping states put together their policies, everyone seems pretty much on the same page that even though the institution doesn't grant the CDL itself, the preparation of the course and the certificate of completion count for the Workforce Pell credential.
I'll add to Iris, over the last 10 years, one thing I neglected to mention, we don't get paid as an institution unless we can prove the student sat for and passed the certification. Yeah. So being able to gather that data, even if it's allowed, you need to be able to show and prove the student got the certification. So Fast Forward bundles those exam fees with the price of the course so that the student doesn't leave and you just assume they're going to go pay the hundreds of dollars for these certifications on their own and let you know about it. You need to have those relationships, a way to track it, a way to have students pay for that certification. Otherwise, you may be doing all this and then not be able to validate they even got the certification.
And Louisiana, you all do something similar, I believe, around industry recognized credentials and sort of third-party certifications.
Yes, so we try to validate those third party. We try to put the processes in place to approve any request of offering credentials that we try to make sure that they are of high wage, high demand, sort of align with that star rating system. So we put a lot of metrics and measures in place. But we still have some areas, and I think many would agree, where gaps exist on being able to validate all that are out there through the third party and or the validation. So we're being very strategic about what we are offering, like many others in Workforce Pell, so we don't find ourselves a year later not meeting within the high benchmark set out to offer Workforce Pell.
And one thing I would add too, I think particularly for those colleges that are not part of a strong state system or, smaller rural colleges too, is really think about like in the TACT grants, right? Or some of the Department of Labor grants. What were those industry-wise recognized credentials that you got credit for as an outcome in those programs? And then often those can help as part of a stackable credential design. And so that's a point where it could be a workforce Pell credential if it's on the way to a 1-year certificate or a 2-year degree, and kind of look at those mechanisms that may have been on a small scale with grants. But this is also going to be on a small scale. So some of those strategies while you're building the data infrastructure, your workforce departments have probably utilized already, and really thinking about what are those credentials that an employer looks for hiring. Those can all count in workforce Pell. It's just not making up a badge or a credential for the sake of that. That's not what we want to do. That's not what colleges want to do. And that's, not good for students either.
I'll just add that I do think the like standalone credential language is a little bit of a red herring, because if it articulates to a program with further credit, it doesn't it doesn't matter that much. The recognized credential language is broad enough to interpret the way you need to.
Yeah, and the question we usually, what you just touched on there, the question we usually get with regards to that is how to square the fact that there is that one credential, exception in as it applies to articulates for credit, but not in the other area. And as you noted before, Iris, a lot of states are rightfully so kind of equating the concepts of stackability and articulating for credit in another program. But the way the law is written and therefore the regulations, that exception applies to one but not the other, even though they're basically the same thing. So
it's really confusing to people, and I basically
Yeah.
like everything has to articulate, so the exception doesn't really matter in stackability.
Yeah. And so that is something we certainly commented on, and but the department sort of had their hands tied in that because it was really a statutory basis. Our next question is, does anyone know if there are any programs in the hospitality industry that have been either, I guess, identified or even accepted in any states?
I quickly looked through some of the state occupation lists that are up, and I did find hospitality specifically called out in Ohio as an acceptable occupation for programs to lead into. And I know that there is actually quite a few states with broader lists that include things like food service. So if you include that under hospitality, that would also be something to look into. So I believe food service is like in Michigan and a few other places that I've seen. So I'll put that out there. As far as which programs have been approved, Kate probably knows that better than I do.
Well, and I think since none have been approved on the federal, we're still like all waiting and seeing.
By
So I think,
states.
right? Yeah, by states. I think, I think what I've heard is there's been a focus on healthcare, advanced manufacturing, just because of the wage threshold, and just especially for the first programs out of the gate. Certainly there's exceptions, but I think given where I think colleges want to do this well, as has been underscored. And so I think they're picking industry sectors that by their nature have some higher wages. I think I have seen some early childhood education, which I think just because there's such a need, but I think that's going to be a wage threshold. And some of the healthcare programs, certainly with CNA and some of the entry level jobs, are going to be challenging also to kind of get to the wage thresholds that we need. But I think that's certainly continued advocacy and explanation needed.
I was just on Pennsylvania's website looking to see if they include hospitality. They do not, but they have 2 approved state programs, both in CDL.
Jan, or anything down your way? It's a big industry down there for sure.
Yeah, so we don't have hospitality, and I would also echo Kate around the healthcare aspect as of today, but we have things like industrial, maintenance, production, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, heavy equipment, automotive vehicle repair, ground transportation, massage therapy. But considering that we do have a large hospitality in the New Orleans region, that is not on the list.
Well, that's good. That's kind of a good segue into our next question, Chandler, which was directed your way. Can you speak more about why and how Louisiana selected its priority industries fields for workforce Pell?
Yeah, so ultimately, we used a program approval process by looking at all of the programs that we've identified that or listed in the star rating system, so 3, 4, and 5 star, and then started to look at the clock hours that are set. Did they meet that threshold? Do they meet the wage threshold and some of those components by looking at data that LA Works had, data that our system had, and then data that our Board of Regents had to really understand a sort of a list in which we all felt comfortable in publishing for our state, which is how we came up with those programs. We did get a lot of questions around, well, where is CDL? Does it qualify? Not. Where is CNA or healthcare? Why is it on the list or not on the list? And a lot of that came down to either clock hours or the wages and where our state fell in terms of the wage and the metrics. And so when looking at that, we specifically were trying to be clear on what information did we use consistent to the program identification, the zip codes, the federal eligibility data, that was that clock hours, the weeks, all of that, the alignment around employer hire, the direct employment, the job completion. So if we had data on completion and job placement, was that considered in that aspect? Is it stackability? It helped us then really build out all of those written processes, policies, and procedures around stackability, employing, hiring, the impact of employers being a part of that work. And so we tried to take it of what we knew from a large scale and scale it down to that list. And that's how we came up with our list. Some could argue that there are other programs in our state that are much more of high value or should be on the list. But when you start to look at that data and the data that we do have, there is a reason why they're not on the list. However, it has helped us identify, and I kept referencing the silos of opportunities to improve the continued data infrastructure and partnership with our agency partners so we can go forward with making sure we feel comfortable inside and removing the silos and feel comfortable and confident in what we are publishing out there is the right programs. So we aren't just giving sort of additional freedom and saying go, and then we find ourselves a year later not being able to continue the eligibility because we put out programs that don't align appropriately. And so we didn't want to be the decision maker. And considering that there are 2 other public 2-year institutions and proprietary institutions, we are just a partner in that puzzle, but we are allowing LA Works to be the good and the bad in this space.
Thanks, Chandler. So we have a question about that I think a couple of you touched on in your comments. The larger barriers, the registrar's office and what role they would play along with the student management system, and what does that integration look like? And the basic question is, has anyone figured that out? No.
Well, maybe our friends at Nova specifically can speak to an institutional level. From a state perspective, I will say this, we sort of continue to chip away at and sharpening that sort of saw at this puzzle. We, over time, migrated from a student information system that was separate of non-credit standalone into migrating our credit and non-credit into one student information system. It wasn't easy, and we still have some of the continued challenges around the registrar and how they think it should function, down to industry perspective of wanting to be a part of adding their employer aspect into the mix and what's required, not required. So something as simple as requiring the social security number, that's an ongoing conversation of how do you have the right information so that LA Works can study the wage data, but yet the employer is not wanting to turn it over, the individual is not wanting to give that information. And so the data then gets a wonky and different. And so we felt in order for us to truly get to that moment of saying the state of Louisiana feels solid about publishing these lists, we had to migrate our institutions early in the process to prepare for the future of what Workforce Pell is going to become. And we had team members at the board office, even before my time, I was at a college, that led these efforts. And we continue to talk today about refining that process, But it was a journey, and I would say in order to get there, if you are in siloed aspects, now is the time to think about removing those silos and trying to merge things into the appropriate systems so they're all working together versus separately.
And I'll echo that. We've had lots of internal meetings. There is no lack of willingness to want to do it. It's really a system-wide technology issue at this point that we've got to go in and have some changes made to allow us to code it a little differently in our SIS system.
Yeah. And I would say, look to some of the colleges that did the clock hour Pell pilot and have been doing this. And I think one of the key things is they, offer a year-round term, right? Which is very different from how we operate, but that allows, then the courses and clock hours to be coded throughout the year because we know those don't follow term schedule. I think that the piece is then really figuring out appropriate attendance reporting so that the financial aid department, they know when to disperse the aid for workforce Pell or for clock hour Pell, but there's colleges that have been offering the 600 clock hour. And so I think looking at those colleges that are further ahead, I think there's also really exploring what the capabilities are currently in the SIS system. I think that's been an interesting part of a non-credit student voices project we've done. There's assumptions the current SIS system does not allow for non-credit or for different things. And then in digging in, there's examples of where that's happened in other states. So I think this is a great time. We need more support for colleges to talk to one another and kind of share how to tackle this.
I know we're
Right.
probably at
Kate, you're
time,
referring to the experimental site initiative by the Department of Education. Yeah.
Yeah.
but now is the time actually to build out the capacity of the institutions to do clock hour for traditional Pell. Because if you can do that, you actually open up Pell eligibility for your non-credit and your longer non-credit programs in a way that is like actually really important to allowing those programs to run more effectively and to give them more of a subsidy. So I would say, based on what Kate is saying and like what we know from the field, is that this could actually have a much larger benefit to the institution if they can figure out how to do clock hour more broadly than just workforce Pell. So you can actually do it for all of your longer term workforce programs that are on your continuing ed side. And that is something that's worth investing in. Although Kate points out it does actually have a cost to the institution in some cases if you can't figure out the technology, and that you need to make sure your data governance around your non-credit is solid so that when you have that conversation with your registrar, it's not take my dirty continuing ed non-credit data and integrate it into your system, but it's like actually here's how we control that data and how we do the definitions and how those definitions align to your definitions. And then that makes the technical conversation go a little bit smoother, I think.
Yeah, there's just a follow-up to that. If anyone of our panelists want to type an answer to this question about what specific SIS product, offered that integration that we're talking about. And then finally, we'll do this as a lightning question. We're a little over time. Do we have any insights into the biotech area? Any knowledge about what might be going on vis-a-vis biotech and workforce Pell? Steve, I know that's something a big thing in your area. Any crosswalk there?
No, because the labor market data tells us it's all in Maryland jobs. They're not in
Oh,
Northern Virginia
okay.
jobs. So even if it's here, we would not be doing that as an offering.
All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists very much, as I know that we are a little bit over time. So thanks so much to Iris, Kate, Steve, and Chandler for their time today and their insight and their wisdom. And like we've said, we'll be getting the slides and the recording up, posted. You'll get a message about that. I'm just going to close a little plug for our event in September called Advocates in Action. This is a 2-day event to come in and really get some great exposure to some top policy people here in Washington, D.C., along with congressional staff, members of Congress, top lobbyists, all those kinds of folks, people from the administration, as well as taking the opportunity to visit with your members of Congress and advocate for the community college agenda. So get out your phone, take a snap of the QR code here, and we hope to see you with us in a little over a month. So thanks very much again, everyone, for being with us. And until next time, have a great summer. Bye now.